It started with a groan, not from a person but from the pipes. That low, hollow sound echoed through the kitchen walls as I turned the faucet, expecting the familiar rush of water to greet me. Instead, nothing. Just a cough of air, a clatter deep in the pipes, and then silence. I frowned. It was barely 6:30 a.m., and the sun hadn't yet broken over the ridge behind our backyard. My wife, Sarah Cole, was still upstairs finishing her morning yoga, and our teenage daughter, Lizzie Cole, hadn't stirred yet. I tried the faucet again. Same thing. I moved to the laundry room sink, then the downstairs bathroom, then even outside to the spigot by the garden. Nothing. No water anywhere. For a split second, I wondered if we'd forgotten to pay a bill. But I handled all the utilities through autopay, and besides, I would have gotten an alert. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper taped to our front door just below the brass handle. Stark white Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association letterhead and bold red ink across the top. Notice of violation. Water use restriction. My gut twisted. I ripped it from the door and read the details. Due to repeated violations of the Hawthorne Ridge landscaping water conservation mandate, your property is hereby suspended from all shared utility services for a period of 14 days or until remittance of fees and corrective measures. There was a QR code at the bottom, a payment link. They wanted $950. I felt heat rise to my face. Landscaping water conservation? That had to be a joke. I'd cut our sprinkler usage by half, installed a drip system last year, and even let our back lawn go partially brown during the drought season. We were the ones setting an example, not breaking rules. Still holding the notice, I turned toward the street just in time to see the green utility cart with HOA compliance stenciled in block letters pulling away from the curb. A man in a high-visibility vest sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on clipboard in hand. He never looked my way. "Hey," I shouted, jogging barefoot down the drive. "You cut my water." The cart paused. He turned his head slowly and pulled to the side. I could hear the faint whir of the electric motor as I approached. The man stepped out, late 30s, squared jaw, regulation buzz cut, and the kind of smug expression you only see on people who think they've never been wrong. "Good morning," he said flatly. "I'm assuming this is your doing." I held out the notice. He didn't even glance at it. "You've exceeded the permitted gallons for non-essential use. The board approved a suspension. You'll get access back once the fees are processed." I laughed, though it came out more as disbelief than humor. "That's not how this works. You can't just cut off someone's entire water supply." He raised a brow. "Actually, I can." Section 4.7.2 of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association Charter gives the HOA authority to restrict common utility access in cases of community endangering waste. "I don't use HOA water," I snapped. "This house has been on city water since 1985. Not anymore," he sighed. As of the infrastructure rezone last year, water routing is managed through the Hawthorne Ridge Joint Utility Agreement, consolidated under HOA oversight for environmental control. My heart dropped. That quiet meeting last fall, when only a handful of homeowners showed up and they offered complimentary wine and cheese, that must have been when they slipped this in. I remember skimming the agenda and seeing water system modernization listed, but it was buried between a new dog park and a lighting upgrade. "You realize this is illegal," I said slowly. His grin widened. "Then feel free to file a complaint. Just do it after you pay the fine." And with that, he turned, stepped into his cart, and drove away. Sarah came down 20 minutes later, towel around her neck, brow furrowed. "The shower didn't work," she said. "What's going on?" I handed her the notice. Her eyes scanned it in seconds. "You've got to be kidding me. You installed gray water collection barrels. They're penalizing us." I nodded. "They claim oversight through Hawthorne Ridge now. That gives them authority to shut off shared systems." Sarah stared at me, her jaw clenched. I knew that look. She was already running a list of legal options in her head. For the past 8 years, she'd worked part-time as a policy analyst for the state's Department of Environmental Protection. If anyone knew the boundaries of municipal and private water rights, it was her. "They can't do this," she murmured. "Not like this." But they did. I glanced at the wall clock, nearly 7:15 now. Lizzie would be up any minute, needing to brush her teeth, eat breakfast, maybe rinse off before school, and we had no water. I turned back toward the kitchen and filled a pot from one of the backup jugs we kept in the garage. Years in the Army taught me the value of preparation, and I'd stored 10 gallons for emergencies. Looks like this counted. By noon, word had spread. 5 other houses on our street had received the same notice. Mrs. Margaret Franklin, who lived 2 doors down and used a cane to get around, knocked on our door in tears. "They shut mine off too," she said. "I can't even make my tea." I helped her carry 2 water jugs from our emergency stash. Later, I drove to City Hall. I wanted to check the Rezone records myself. I knew someone on staff, James Larson, a junior clerk I'd coached in youth baseball years ago. He pulled up the digital files for me, and I scanned line after line of legalese until I found it. Utility oversight for irrigation and household supply to be centralized under Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association per joint ordinance 12-77, effective retroactively. Retroactively. They'd written it to cover their tracks. I stared at the screen, but something tugged at me. "Hey, James," I asked. "This reservoir they're routing through, does the HOA own it?" He blinked. "Hawthorne Ridge Reservoir. No, that's still parcel 47B. Private deed, not city, not HOA." My fingers tightened around the printout. Parcel 47B. I knew that number. I'd seen it years ago on a dusty old folder in my attic. I had a feeling, a strong bone-deep feeling. I still owned it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence in our home was deafening, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, brittle kind. The absence of water became more than an inconvenience. It was a violation, a message. And the more I stared at the printout from City Hall, the more it felt like a line had been crossed. Sarah lay beside me, eyes closed, but not resting. I could tell by the subtle way her breathing changed whenever her mind was racing. She'd been quiet since dinner, methodically outlining potential state-level violations, flipping through binders, and making notes in her phone. We were both doing what we always did in crisis, preparing. "I want to check the attic," I whispered. She didn't open her eyes. "The blue trunk, yeah." She nodded once. "Be careful. That latch is rusted." I slipped out of bed, pulled on an old flannel, and made my way into the hallway. Our house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood. The attic stairs groaned as I pulled them down and climbed up into the musty dark. The blue trunk was buried under holiday bins, photo albums, and a box labeled Dad's Army Stuff. It took 10 minutes of dust-choked digging before I found it. And when I did, I knew. My hands trembled as I unclipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside were maps, ledgers, envelopes, yellowed with time, and at the very bottom, a manila folder with the words, Hawthorne Ridge Reservoir, 47B. Transfer agreement, restricted, scrawled in block print. I opened it. There it was, my name. The deed, the official land parcel number signed and notarized in 2002. The ink was faded, but legible. A quiet, forgotten agreement made when the HOA was just a friendly neighborhood council back when I'd offered to let them route pipes through a part of my land to support the growing community. I remember the day clearly. The then president of the HOA was a kind widow named Elsie Thompson. She came to me with a handwritten note asking permission to route a line through my acreage for the newly dug reservoir. I agreed so long as it served everyone fairly and free of charge. No contracts, no politics. Just neighborliness, but that was 22 years ago. Now someone was abusing that goodwill. The next morning, I took the deed to a private real estate attorney, Gina Klein, a woman I'd worked with before. She was sharp and discreet. She raised an eyebrow as she examined the papers. "This is legit," she said. "And here, see this clause." She pointed to a small paragraph halfway down. "You retained water rights. They're not leasing the land. They're using it at your discretion. You can revoke access at any time so long as proper notice is given." I leaned forward. "Even if the HOA is routing all neighborhood water through it," she nodded. "Especially if that water is tied to any kind of profit like enforcement fines or penalties. That voids their informal right of use under most state laws. I sat back. They were finished, and they didn't even know it. That evening, Braxton Keller returned. I saw him from the living room window, striding up our walk like he owned it, green vest on tablet, in hand-mirrored shades reflecting the sinking sun. He rang the doorbell twice. I opened the door just wide enough to block the view inside. "We've already been notified," I said. "I'm here for the second inspection," he replied. "Your wife's potted succulents violate Article 3.1.1 on hardscape coverage." "Succulents," I repeated flatly. "Too many per square foot." I studied him for a moment. "Is that really why you're here? Or is this just you playing sheriff again?" His expression didn't flinch. "I don't make the rules. I enforce them." I held up the folder in my hand. "Good. Because these rules just changed." I passed him a copy of the reservoir deed. He took it, gave it a cursory glance, then tried to hand it back. "I don't have time for jokes. It's not a joke. Parcel 47B is mine. I own the land your precious reservoir sits on. I have full authority over its use, access, and flow. And unless this HOA backs down from its illegal overreach, I'm shutting it off." For the first time, his face faltered. "I'm giving you 48 hours, I said. Reinstate our water, drop the fines, apologize to my wife, and issue a neighborhood-wide memo retracting every false citation. Otherwise, I will exercise full legal control of that land and shut off the system completely." He tried to find his footing. "You can't just, I interrupted, and I will." He turned, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. He didn't even bother with the cart. He walked. That night I got a call. Blocked number. I answered anyway. "Mr. Cole," the voice said, "we've been informed of your intent to revoke reservoir access. We strongly urge you to reconsider. The HOA has invested heavily in infrastructure, and your cooperation is expected under community alignment initiatives. Who is this A representative of the board?" "No name, a pause. I'm just here to advise." "Retaliation could have consequences." I almost laughed. That reservoir wouldn't exist if I hadn't allowed it. There wouldn't be water to abuse or people to extort. If consequences are on the table, I suggest you look in the mirror. Silence. Then the line went dead. The next morning I filed a formal notice of access termination with the County Utility Department. Sarah helped me write it clear, specific, legal. In 72 hours, the main valve on Hawthorne Ridge Reservoir would be shut. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but things were about to change. Dramatically. That afternoon, the silence in our home felt louder than any alarm. The faucets remained dry, the air heavy with the kind of tension you can't see but you feel in your bones. Sarah was trying to keep Lizzie calm while boiling bottled water just so we could rinse some fruit. Meanwhile, I sat at the edge of the dining table with an old storage box opened in front of me. In that moment, I remembered a conversation I had nearly 20 years ago, the day we closed on the property. The previous owner, a retired civil engineer named Harold Givens, had leaned in across the paperwork and said, "Just so you know, you're inheriting more than a backyard here." I hadn't thought much of it then, but now with our water cut off and the HOA waving their fake authority around like a badge, his words took on a different weight. I dug through the folder until I found it, an old, folded county map with parcel lines drawn in blue ink, slightly smudged with age. There it was. Parcel 47B, our lot. But it didn't just stop where the lawn ended. The line extended long, narrow, and almost deliberately forgotten northwest toward a small shaded section labeled Secondary Basin, Hawthorne Ridge. Sarah was called. "Come look at this." She came over, brushing flour off her hands. "What is it?" "This," I pointed, "is the reservoir. And this right here is our property line. Look how it overlaps." Her eyes scanned the map. "You think we own part of the reservoir?" "I think we own the reservoir," I said slowly. "Or at least the intake structure, which means the HOA doesn't." That night, I drove down to the county records office. I had a friend there, Danny Brooks, a veteran like me, who now worked in deeds and assessments. He owed me a favor. I showed him the map, the parcel number, and the original deed from Harold Givens. Danny squinted at the screen as he pulled up the digital files. "Oh man," he muttered. "You've been flying under the radar all this time. What do you see?" "Well, Your property was grandfathered in from the original Hawthorne Ridge Farm, back when the reservoir was built in the late 70s. You inherited the easement rights to the water system intake. And guess what? The HOA was leasing that access through a civic agreement. And he turned and looked at me. The lease expired in 2016. They never renewed it. I exhaled. Slowly, deliberately. You're telling me they've been drawing water through a structure that's legally on my land, without permission? He nodded. For 7 years. That means they're in violation of municipal code and property law. You could shut it down tomorrow, and they wouldn't have a legal leg to stand on. I thanked him, left with copies of everything, deed, lease agreement, historical ownership logs, and drove straight home. Back at the house, I stood at the edge of our land where the tree line met an old gravel path. I hadn't walked this trail in years. It was overgrown now, but muscle memory took over. Past the blackberry bushes and the rusted fence, I came to the gate, a small square utility shed, with a faded green door and no markings except a weathered number etched into the metal, numbered 12B. Inside it was quiet, dusty, still. And at the center of it all was the valve. The main intake. No security, no locks, just a simple, unlabeled panel. And a keyhole. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key Harold had handed me that day so many years ago. It was scratched and old, but when I inserted it, it turned. Smoothly. Click. I didn't shut the water off, not yet, but I stood there for a long while with my hand on the valve, imagining what would happen if I did. And in that silence, I realized something. They weren't just abusing power. They were using my own land, my own generosity, as a weapon against me. And that was going to end. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, replaying every decision I'd made that led me to this point. Sarah slept beside me, her breathing steady, one arm curled protectively around Lizzie, who'd snuck into our bed after another cold water sponge bath. I envied their peace, but I couldn't ignore what I knew anymore. The reservoir wasn't just a technicality. It was the result of a handshake and trust, a deal I'd made 20 years ago with a community I thought would honor it. I met Harold Givens back in 2002 when I was freshly out of active duty and trying to build something steady for my family. Harold had owned over 200 acres in Hawthorne Ridge before selling off sections to developers. He was tired, kind, and sharp as ever in his 70s. Said he didn't trust HOA developers, but he liked me. Said I had eyes that didn't lie. We had coffee in his kitchen one morning before closing the sale. He told me something I never forgot. You're buying more than a house, son. You're buying history. That reservoir, out back, it's on your parcel part of it anyway. Built it myself in '78 with the Army Corps. When you move in, you'll have the rights to it. Just water, though, no building. But that water matters more than most people realize. I'd asked him, so what am I supposed to do with it? Harold had shrugged. Up to you. I let the community use it, quietly. Never charged a cent. Felt like the right thing. If you want to keep that going, great. If they screw it up, pull the plug. I had nodded and promised I'd follow his example. And for nearly 2 decades, I did. No leases, no fees, no announcements, just unspoken cooperation. The reservoir fed water through buried pipes into the Hawthorne Ridge grid, and I never interfered. There was dignity in simplicity. It felt like the kind of agreement old soldiers respected, unwritten but sacred. Until HOA leadership changed. The original HOA board had been friendly, mostly made up of retired teachers and old-timers who remembered the handshake era. They knew about the reservoir situation and respected it. But 5 years ago, everything shifted. A new board was elected, young, aggressive, corporate-minded. Braxton Keller appeared the year after that. He came from somewhere out of state. Claimed to have a background in municipal compliance and asset management. What he really had was a penchant for control. Within months, he'd instituted arbitrary water usage rules, strict fines, and threats of property penalties. I remember the first letter we got. Dear resident, your lawn has exceeded acceptable hydration volume. Failure to comply may result in service interruption. Sarah laughed it off. I didn't. Still, I stayed quiet. I was hoping things would balance out. They didn't. A year ago, Braxton started charging seasonal utility management fees. No vote, no hearing. Just a bill in the mailbox. When I confronted him at a community meeting, he dismissed me with a smirk. We're optimizing resources, sir, he'd said. You'll thank us when it's sustainable. He didn't know I was the reason it had been sustainable for 20 years, and now he'd dared to shut off my family's water. Using a resource he didn't own, he didn't lease, and he didn't understand. It was betrayal not just of me, but of Harold, of trust, of community. The next morning, I called a meeting with my lawyer, Gina Klein. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who once helped me negotiate with a predatory insurance company after a wildfire damaged our fence line. I trusted her. I showed her the deed, the map, the old lease paperwork, and the county records Danny had helped me dig up. She flipped through everything carefully, pausing only to sip from her travel mug. When she finished, she said they're exposed. Gross negligence on their part. And if we can prove they collected fees based on use of this reservoir, we can make a solid case for fraud. What about shutting off the water, I asked. You'd be within your rights. There's no active easement, no lease. You've got documentation. Just make sure you notify them clearly before you act. Put it in writing. Certified. I nodded slowly. They won't take it well. They don't have to, she said. That evening, I wrote the letter. It was short and direct. To the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association. Effective immediately, I am terminating all unofficial access and use of the Hawthorne Ridge Reservoir due to expired lease agreements and unauthorized water extraction from private property, parcel 47B. You are hereby given 48 hours to prepare alternative arrangements. Any attempt to access or modify the valve system on my land will be considered trespassing. Nathaniel Cole. I signed it, had it notarized, and sent copies by certified mail email and hand delivery to the HOA Dropbox. I waited. They didn't respond, so I walked back to that little green shed one more time, this time with a pair of gloves, a wrench, and a lock. At exactly 6 p.m., I turned the valve. The water stopped. The first night without water was quiet. Almost too quiet. I kept expecting someone to come pounding on my door demanding to know why nothing came out of their taps. But instead, Hawthorne Ridge sank into a hushed discomfort. The kind where the air gets thick with tension, and everyone is just waiting for someone else to react first. By morning, that silence turned into murmurs. My neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Camden, an 82-year-old widow who lived 2 houses down, waved me over as I retrieved the paper from the driveway. Her voice cracked with worry. Do you know what's going on with the water, Nathaniel? I didn't lie. Yes, ma'am, I do. She clutched her bathrobe tighter. They said it was a city issue, but I called Public Works. They said they haven't touched anything. I nodded. They're right. It's not the city. It's the HOA. She stared at me like I'd just told her the sun was fake. But they're supposed to protect us. Not this time. By noon, the Hawthorne Ridge community chat group exploded with frustration. Screenshots of emails from Braxton, automated notices, vague claims about maintenance issues, and unforeseen disruptions. No one mentioned the reservoir. No one admitted fault. But I watched from my porch as the HOA truck made 4 loops around the block, slowing in front of every home with browned lawns or fading flower beds. I saw Braxton get out at one point, holding a clipboard, sweating through his khakis. He didn't approach me. Not yet. But the stories began pouring in. First, it was Mr. and Mrs. Robert Davis. They'd received a $150 fine for non-compliant landscaping, even though their water had been off for 48 hours. Then it was Mr. and Mrs. Henry Lee, who got a warning notice for unsanitary property conditions because their bird bath was dry. Each letter came signed in perfect script, Braxton V. Keller, Compliance Director. Compliance. That word burned more every time I read it. By the end of the second day, 3 more residents told me they'd received citations. Sarah overheard two moms talking outside the elementary school, whispering about how they felt like prisoners in their own homes. One said she was afraid to speak up because last time, she complained about HOA fees. A security camera showed up mysteriously on her mailbox the next week. The Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association wasn't protecting us. It was ruling us. And I had let it happen by staying quiet too long. That night, I pulled out the file cabinet in the garage, the one I hadn't touched since my last deployment. Inside were folders labeled with my old system's red equals risk, blue equals assets, green equals legal. I started organizing. Over the next 2 days, I interviewed neighbors, collected their letters, photocopied notices, and compiled a timeline of Braxton's compliance program. Gina helped cross-reference state statutes on utility rights, fraudulent fines, and abuse of authority under non-governmental organizations. Danny mapped the affected properties and water lines using GIS overlays from county records. The picture became terrifyingly clear. Braxton wasn't just a power-hungry bureaucrat. He was building a private enforcement network. His HOA officers were nothing more than hired contractors with no law enforcement training, outfitted in security uniforms to simulate authority. They weren't authorized to issue citations. They weren't recognized by the city. And they were operating entirely under HOA funds collected from residents who didn't know any better. Even worse, we discovered that Braxton had drafted a proposal buried in HOA, meeting minutes to form a residential civil compliance corps, a pseudo-military enforcement team under his direct control. He pitched it as a preventative maintenance unit, but attached to it were vendor contracts for gear patrol schedules and plans to install new surveillance units across Hawthorne Ridge. This wasn't just HOA mismanagement. It was a quiet coup and the Reservoir. That was his leverage. The HOA had been drawing from it, billing residents as if the water came from the city supply and pocketing the difference. No permits, no rights, no consent. My consent was the only thing that ever made it legal. And I had just ripped that away. On the fourth day, Braxton Keller finally showed up at my door. He didn't knock, just stood there with his hands behind his back, trying to look official in a green vest and a smug half smile. "Nathaniel," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "We are talking." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've made a mistake, a big one. Cutting off a resource that serves the public, it's reckless, irresponsible, borderline criminal." I folded my arms. Funny. I could say the same about unauthorized access to private property, issuing fraudulent fines, and misrepresenting legal authority. His jaw twitched. "You think you're clever, no? I just know how to read land deeds and state codes." He took a step closer. "This isn't over." "It will be soon," I replied. "And not in the way you think." He left without another word. That night, I got a letter taped to my door. Cease and desist from Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association Legal Department. It threatened me with litigation, property liens, and permanent revocation of residency privileges. Sarah read it aloud, then tossed it into the fireplace. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. I stared into the flames, thinking of Harold, of his calloused handshake and quiet warnings. They had turned kindness into currency. But now they'd picked the wrong well to steal from. By sunrise on the fifth day, Hawthorne Ridge was in full crisis mode. The neighborhood group chat had gone from passive-aggressive memes to full-blown panic. Parents were begging for bottled water for their kids. Someone posted a photo of a melted ice tray and tagged it HOA rationing in 2025. Another shared a video of Braxton driving away from the clubhouse in a black SUV, refusing to answer questions. But the comment that hit me hardest came from one of the oldest residents, Mr. Victor Alvarez. "I've lived here 41 years. This is not the Hawthorne Ridge I built a life in. It's a prison now." That same morning, I received an anonymous envelope on my porch. Inside were photocopies of internal HOA communications emails between Braxton and two vendors outlining plans to install biometric entry pads at all Hawthorne Ridge entrances, controlled solely by the compliance unit. They were planning to lock people in. I stood there with the papers in my hand, hearing the distant hum of sprinklers from houses still hoping water might come back. And I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about the reservoir anymore. This was about sending a message. That afternoon, I drove out to the property edge, just beyond the tree line where the green metal shed sat, disguised under a thicket of cedar. The path was overgrown, untouched for years, and I had to kick away brambles just to reach the padlocked door. Inside was the main valve, built in '78 by the Army Corps of Engineers, exactly as Harold had said. It controlled every gallon that flowed down the buried pipe into Hawthorne Ridge. I crouched, slid on a pair of gloves, and pulled out a wrench. But before turning the wheel, I took a moment. I remembered the first summer we moved in. Sarah planting lavender in the backyard. Lizzie running through sprinklers in a Minnie Mouse swimsuit. Neighbors waving as they passed on bikes. Hawthorne Ridge had meant something, and maybe it still could. I turned the valve all the way shut. The pressure gauge dropped. The silence was absolute. I stood up, locked the shed, and snapped a photo of the gauge with a timestamp. Proof. The water was off by my hand and mine alone. By the time I returned home, my inbox had 5 unread emails from the HOA. The last one simply said urgent. Request for emergency negotiation. I ignored it. Instead, I uploaded the time-stamped photo, the scanned land deed, and the water access termination letter into a shared folder and posted the link publicly in the Hawthorne Ridge group chat with the caption, "You deserve to know the truth. I own the reservoir. I shut it off. Here's why." I braced for backlash. Instead, I got silence, and then support. One by one, residents replied with stories of harassment, unfair fees, threats, and unexplained charges. A woman shared her bank statement showing $400 withdrawn under seasonal infrastructure assessment. Another posted a video of a man in a green vest snooping around her back gate at midnight. By nightfall, someone started a petition to hold an emergency town hall. It got 137 signatures in 2 hours. That evening, I watched Sarah kneel beside Lizzie, helping her wash up with a pitcher of water warmed on the stove. She looked up and smiled, not the forced one she used when things were breaking, but a real one. Proud. Fierce. "You really did it," she said. I nodded. "It's not over." But it started. The next day, the HOA sent a representative to our door, a man in a stiff suit clearly not used to walking on gravel. He held out a folder. A proposal to renegotiate water access under new terms. I didn't even look at it. "Talk to the neighborhood," I said. "You don't get to negotiate with me in private. We're willing to offer compensation. No more secret deals. You want water, you come clean to everyone, or Hawthorne Ridge stays dry." He left without another word. That afternoon, the town hall was confirmed. It would be held at the Hawthorne Ridge Community Center in 3 days. I already knew what I'd bring, not just the documents or the photos, but a blue duffel bag. Inside it, the original contract Harold had signed, the deed, the GIS maps, and the wrench. Because sometimes the only way to reopen a community is to show them the tool that shut it down. I didn't sleep much that night. Though Hawthorne Ridge was quiet, there was something eerie about the silence. No sprinklers ticking in the dark, no late-night hose trickling into flower beds, just the low hum of AC units and the occasional rustle of wind through dry leaves. The water had only been off for 24 hours, and already everything was unraveling. At 6:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of a generator kicking in. Across the street, the Hollisters were trying to pump water from an old rain barrel into their bathroom. By 8 Tilbury, someone had dragged a camping shower onto their driveway. I spotted 3 neighbors carting gallon jugs of water from the nearby gas station. At 9:35 a.m., the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association sent an emergency community notice. Due to an unexpected infrastructure malfunction, water access in Hawthorne Ridge is temporarily suspended. Please remain calm as our team works to restore service. I almost laughed. Infrastructure malfunction. Try property owner correction. But the real panic began at noon. That's when the Hawthorne Ridge Swim and Racket Club, arguably the HOA's crown jewel, was forced to shut down. Word spread fast. Water levels in the pool were plummeting, toilets were dry, and a fight had broken out between 2 parents over bottled water in the clubhouse fridge. The HOA tried calling in private water tankers, but without permit access to the roads surrounding the intake line, the trucks were turned away by the county. Legally, they had no grounds. I kept to myself watching through the window. Sarah stayed busy turning the kitchen into a rationing station gallons, organized by day, reusable buckets, wipes, even a pot labeled bathwater boil. Lizzie thought it was a game. But out there, Hawthorne Ridge was coming undone. One neighbor, Mr. Thomas Cooper, approached me in the driveway. He was in his 60s, retired Navy, a no-nonsense kind of guy. "You do this?" he asked, his voice low. I looked him in the eye. "Yeah, I did." He nodded. No anger. Just a slow breath. "Good," he said. "They've been leeching off us for years. Others weren't so calm." That afternoon, a small group of HOA loyalists marched up our driveway, clipboards, polos, and all. Their ringleader was a woman named Denise Harper, the beautification chair. Whatever that meant. "You need to undo this right now," she barked, finger pointed. "People are suffering." I stepped forward. "And I've suffered your lies for too long. You're standing on ground you don't understand, Denise. This is community sabotage." "No," I said, raising the folder in my hand. "This is community protection." I handed her a copy of the original easement contract, the one Harold Givens signed 20 years ago, granting Hawthorne Ridge access to the reservoir under a simple clause, mutual respect and good faith. "And this," I said, pointing to the date in bold, expired in 2016. "No renewals, no signatures, and certainly no legal authority for what Braxton's been doing." She looked stunned, speechless for once. "You've been living off my generosity," I added, "and using it as a weapon. That ends now." They left without another word. But the silence didn't last. At sundown, the Hawthorne Ridge Facebook group exploded. Screenshots of HOA documents were leaking, real ones. Residents began comparing notes, misused dues, suspicious payments to private contractors, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to Braxton's office. And then, the power flickered. It came back after a minute, but the implication was clear. Hawthorne Ridge's infrastructure was buckling under its own weight. That night, someone pounded on our door. It wasn't HOA. It was neighbors, 12 of them. Some I knew, some I didn't. Mr. Victor Alvarez, Mr. and Mrs. Stephen McKay, Jenna Miller from Maple Bend. They weren't angry. They were ready. "We want to hold a meeting," one woman said, "with everyone. Not just the board. All of us. We need to talk." Sarah stepped beside me. "Then let's host it here," she said. Our home, the same one that had been threatened by citations and control, was now becoming a center of clarity. So we set up folding chairs, made iced tea from our rationed bottles, opened every window, and as the sun dipped behind the reservoir, the one no one used to talk about, we watched our neighbors file in one by one. They weren't looking for war. They were looking for water. But more than that, they were finally ready to see the truth. By the time the Hawthorne Ridge Town Hall began the next evening, word had spread far beyond the confines of our quiet suburb. Local news vans parked along the street. A reporter from Channel 5 stood outside the clubhouse, brushing her hair down before a live segment. One of the HOA board members, someone I didn't recognize, tried to wave her off with a clipboard in hand. It was useless. The community was awake now. We held the meeting on the basketball court behind the Hawthorne Ridge Community Center. It was the only space large enough to hold the turnout. Over 200 people showed up. Kids sat on laps. Elders leaned on walkers. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years stood shoulder to shoulder in plastic folding chairs under the string lights the HOA forgot to take down after spring movie night. I arrived carrying the same blue duffel bag I'd used in my military days. Inside were the deeds maps, old agreements, and every ounce of truth Hawthorne Ridge had been denied. I wasn't the first to speak. That honor went to Mr. Victor Alvarez. He stood with the help of his cane, pulled the microphone close, and said simply, "I've lived in this community for over 4 decades. I never thought I'd see the day when access to water became a weapon. We owe the truth a voice." The crowd erupted into applause. One by one, neighbors rose. Jenna Miller spoke about the letter she received threatening fines over her mother's bird feeder. Mr. and Mrs. Stephen McKay shared a story about their security camera footage mysteriously disappearing after an HOA officer entered their backyard for routine inspection. A father of 3 stood up and revealed that Braxton had demanded compliance fees under the table to approve offense permit fees that never showed up on official records. Then they called my name. I stepped up to the center with the duffel bag and took a breath. My name is Nathaniel Cole, I began. And 15 years ago, I bought a house here because I believed in community. I believed in trust. That belief made me give something freely, something we all took for granted. I unzipped the duffel and held up the original 2002 water access agreement signed, sealed, and expired. This reservoir, I pointed toward the tree line, has belonged to my family since before Hawthorne Ridge existed. We shared it without hesitation, but that trust has been broken. I laid out each document. Land surveys proving the reservoir was carved from my family's land. The handwritten notes from Harold Givens detailing the terms of that original handshake deal. Emails I had obtained anonymously from a whistleblower messages, showing that Braxton had been plotting a private water company scheme under the guise of HOA improvements. I played a recorded phone call between Braxton and a contractor where he said, quote, "Once we finalize the buyout, we can set the rates however we want. Nobody reads fine print." Murmurs turned into gasps. The final nail. The letter from the county utilities office verifying that Hawthorne Ridge's current water system had no legal claim over the reservoir and was in technical violation of environmental ordinances for mismanaging access. People began shouting not at me, but at the board members seated stiffly at the side table, suddenly silent eyes darting for exits. Braxton was nowhere to be found. I leaned forward and said I didn't shut off your water to punish you. I did it because you were being used, controlled, and because silence only feeds corruption. A hand shot up. What happens now? I looked at the crowd. That's up to you. And it was. By the end of the night, 3 board members had resigned on the spot. A vote was called to dissolve the existing Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association Council passed with 94% support. A new committee was nominated right then and there, made up of teachers, veterans, parents, retirees, people who lived real lives on real streets. They asked me if I'd serve on it. I shook my head. I already have a job, I said, making sure that reservoir never becomes a weapon again. Mr. Victor Alvarez clapped. Then the McKays. Then everyone. I stepped away from the mic, walked back to my seat, and felt Sarah's hand slip into mine. "You did more than turn a valve," she whispered. "You turned the tide." And in the soft flicker of string lights and the first cool night breeze we'd had in weeks, I believed her. Because Hawthorne Ridge was no longer controlled by fear. It was rising one voice at a time. The fallout came quicker than anyone could have expected. By sunrise the next morning, Hawthorne Ridge's Facebook group had gone from neighborhood bake sale announcements to a fully mobilized investigative archive. Screenshots scanned letters, bank statement fragments. Every thread pulled seemed to unravel. Something deeper. At 8:07 a.m., someone posted an anonymous spreadsheet, HOA expenditures, for the past 2 years. It showed over $43,000 allocated to consulting services tied to a non-existent LLC registered in a neighboring state. The listed address, a strip mall mailbox 2 counties over. People started connecting dots and names. By 10 a.m., Braxton Keller's face was on the local news. Channel 7 ran a segment titled HOA Scandal in Hawthorne Ridge Allegations of Fraud and Abuse of Power. The reporter stood in front of the now-closed Hawthorne Ridge clubhouse, gesturing to a lockbox freshly installed on the front door. Inside the segment, residents described aggressive fee enforcement, retaliatory citations, and unauthorized surveillance. Someone even uploaded drone footage showing a private HOA storage shed hidden behind a line of overgrown cypress trees. Inside it contained dozens of unused citation forms, compliance warning door hangers, and security uniforms with fake badges. That afternoon, county investigators, real ones, arrived with questions. I stood at my front gate and watched as 2 unmarked sedans pulled up to Braxton's house. He never answered the door. Rumors swirled that he'd left town sometime in the early morning hours, taking 2 boxes of documents with him. But he couldn't take the damage he'd done or hide from what was coming. The Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association, as it had been known, no longer existed. A vote to formally dissolve the board passed in record time. In less than 48 hours, the county had appointed an interim oversight administrator to help transition the neighborhood into a temporary self-governance model, until elections could be held for a new council, this time with strict bylaws and third-party oversight. More shocking revelations followed. Residents uncovered that several of the HOA's enforcement officers weren't even background checked. One had a prior conviction for impersonating a public official. Another had been previously sued for harassment while employed at a private security firm. But the biggest blow came when a class action suit was filed. 34 homeowners came together, including elderly residents who had been harassed or fined unfairly, and jointly filed a lawsuit against Braxton and the prior board for fraud, emotional distress, and illegal collection practices. Sarah offered to help coordinate statements. She worked late into the night, cross-referencing every claim with the HOA's own paper trail. Her efficiency was surgical, cold, precise, and driven by a quiet fury I hadn't seen in years. Lizzie, our daughter, asked us what was going on. She'd heard the neighbors whispering. We told her the truth. That man tried to use something that belongs to everyone to control people. And sometimes people have to stand up and say no. That's what Mommy and Daddy did. She blinked. So you're the good guys, I smiled. We're trying to be. In the middle of all this, I walked back out to the reservoir one evening. It was calm, reflecting the pinks and oranges of the setting sun. That patch of water had been silent witness to all of it, the trust, the betrayal, the return. I traced the curve of the concrete access point and ran my fingers along the rusted valve I'd once closed. It had started a storm. But storms wash away the rot. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Mr. Thomas Cooper, he nodded. Whole damn place feels different, he said, hands in his pockets. Cleaner. Truth'll do that, I replied. He paused. You ever think about running? For the new board, I chuckled. I think I've done my part. You gave people their voice back, he said. I didn't respond. Just watched the breeze stir the reservoir's surface, carrying with it something close to peace. By the end of the week, water flowed again, not just through the pipes, but between neighbors. Barriers that had been cemented with suspicion began to crack. Sarah helped organize a water donation system for elderly residents during the last days of the transition. Volunteers set up a pop-up stand to distribute clean jugs, snacks, and updated information. HOA-branded signs were taken down. The ugly beige patrol golf cart Braxton used to roll around and sold at auction proceeds went to the neighborhood legal defense fund. People were tired, but they were also proud. What had started with a dry faucet had turned into a reckoning. Not just with a man or a system, but with the silence that let it thrive. 2 weeks after the truth came out, I stood once again at the valve by the Hawthorne Ridge Reservoir, this time not to shut things down, but to open them back up. Beside me stood 3 representatives from the newly formed Hawthorne Ridge Water Oversight Committee. All were homeowners. None were career politicians. They included a retired school principal, a local nurse, and Mr. Victor Alvarez, who, despite needing his cane, stood straighter than anyone there. We were surrounded by silence, save for the occasional bird and the wind whispering through the trees. The reservoir shimmered under the morning sun. Its surface was smooth, almost unaware of the chaos its stillness had caused. I placed my hand on the iron wheel, gave it a steady turn, and heard the faint groan of old pipes waking from their sleep. A beat later, the distant hiss of flowing water echoed across the field. Water was life. Water was peace. And this time it came with clarity. Sarah had drafted the new agreement herself. It was clear, enforceable, and fair. It declared that access to the reservoir would be granted under a joint stewardship contract between my family and the Hawthorne Ridge community, monitored, quarterly, publicly reported, and impossible to be hijacked by a private entity again. And this time it came with protections. The county signed off. The state acknowledged it. Even the local environmental bureau, endorsed the sustainability clauses Sarah included, praising them as a model for suburban resource sharing. For the first time, the water had real guardians. But something else had changed too. Hawthorne Ridge was no longer the kind of place where people turned their heads or swallowed their outrage. Neighbors who barely knew each other's names before were now exchanging updates at the mailbox. People started planting gardens again without fear of fake citations. Kids rode bikes without being told their helmets weren't code compliant. Even our mailbox, which had been vandalized early on during the HOA's crackdown, now bore a fresh coat of paint, thanks to Lizzie and her best friend from next door, who'd added flower stickers just because. That Saturday, we hosted a neighborhood cookout. Not an HOA-approved event, but a true communal gathering. No rules about canopy colors or burger counts. Just laughter grills smoking and the faint sound of country music playing from someone's porch. At one point, I found myself talking to Mr. Edward Halverson, a man who had once led a protest against water rationing under Braxton's rule. "You really own the reservoir, huh?" he asked, with a skeptical smirk. "Every drop," I replied. He nodded. "Good. Because the way things were going, I was ready to dig a well myself." We laughed. Later, Sarah pulled me aside. She looked tired but lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. "They offered me a position," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "County Emergency Preparedness Team," she added. "They want someone who knows what it's like to be ignored until things collapse." I paused, and I asked. I told them yes. I took her hand. "They're lucky to have you." She smiled. "You too." I didn't know what she meant until she gestured toward a small circle of neighbors nearby. People huddled around copies of our new water agreement, asking questions, making plans. They were looking at me like I had answers. Maybe I did. Because I'd learned something through all of this. Something I hadn't realized even after years in uniform or a lifetime of quiet service. Sometimes protecting your country means protecting your corner of it. Not with weapons or laws alone, but with truth. With presence. With refusing to let power go unchecked. That night after the cookout, after the final cooler had been drained and the last folding chair returned, I walked back to the reservoir alone. The moonlight painted silver ripples across the surface. Frogs croaked in rhythm with the night. I stood still, hand resting on the now open valve. Not guarding it, just remembering. I wasn't sure what would come next. Whether Hawthorne Ridge would stay this unified. Whether the wounds Braxton left would heal clean. But I knew one thing for certain. This water, this land, would never be used as a weapon again. Because now it belonged not just to me. It belonged to all of us. And that made all the difference.